It's 10:05, so go ahead and get started.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jovita Pajarillo, and I am with the Envirothon. I'm the chair of the steering committee, and we're excited to present our series of climate change webinars for you all in preparation for our annual event, April 15th at Wind Wolves Preserve in Bakersfield. And I know I'll be seeing many of you there. So I want to welcome you. I had a big surprise this morning. I woke up and looked out the window and there's a Cooper's hawk just on the fence near my bird feeder. So that was kind of wild. Anyway, I just want to welcome you. I won't take much time, but I do want to introduce the two co-hosts. Today, we have Ilima Segoviano. She's with NRCS out of Indio. And with her is Lillian Trejo. She's also with NRCS from the Oroville field office. So I'll leave it to the ladies. Oh, I just want to say, I apologize for the not finding the Zoom link this morning. I was glad I was awake as early as I was or awake as late as I was last night. We're gonna definitely fix that logistics. I just don't know what happened. And also I want to direct your attention to our website for future webinars. We've got 3 added at the end of this month and early March on soils. So be sure that you periodically check our website for those webinars. Also, please pose your questions to Dr. Sweet, either via chat, but I think we would like to see your enthusiastic faces as you pose your question. So I'll leave it to Lillian to make the introduction.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see some of you. You have your cameras on and the rest of you don't, and that is absolutely fine. Just want to also say and add on to what was just mentioned. If you have questions, put them in the chat. We will address your questions at the end of the talk. So with that, I would love to introduce our speaker, Lynn Sweet. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. So Dr. Lynn Sweet is a research ecologist at the University of California, Riverside Center for Conservation Biology. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Dickens College and a PhD in plant biology from the University of California, Riverside. Her research centers on desert and plant ecology and communities and conservation biogeography with an emphasis on global climate change and species modeling. Her recent work examined the distribution of desert plants and long-term changes in plant community composition due to drought and climate change. Much of her work was completed within the Coachella Valley and Joshua Tree National Park. She received numerous grant awards from organizations like the National Park Service, Mojave National Preserve, the Bureau of Land Management, and Coachella Valley Association of Governments. She has co-authored more than 27 articles, including more than 13 peer-reviewed journal articles. So we are excited to have her and excited to learn more about her research. So go ahead, Dr. Lynn Sweet.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Excited to talk to you, science students and those interested in the environment. Just checking, can you hear me okay? All good? Okay. All right. Sounds like we're going to handle questions in the chat towards the end. If there's something really unclear, please put it in the chat so that the co-hosts can let me know if my slides aren't changing and so forth. And at the end, we'll have a chance to, again, ask questions, and you could even unmute and ask me a question as well. So I'm going to talk about our project looking at climate change in Joshua Tree National Park. And I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit more also about our California deserts, because I understand you're all from California, but maybe different parts of California. So in this starting slide, this is a Joshua Tree woodland that was right near Yucca Valley where I was living. Beautiful. It's a beautiful desert environment. And my slides are advancing a little slowly, so I'm just going to try to work with that. So while we're waiting for the slide to change, oh, let's see here. It's not changing now. I'm gonna just stop screen sharing just for a sec so that I can, there we go. Okay, never mind. All right, I've got it to change. Can you see a map?
Yes, we
Let me
see
know.
the map.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so what are California's, where are California's deserts? Why do they matter? About 10% of the state of California is actually this arid land in the state of California. Deserts occur where rain falls less than about 50 centimeters a year. The Mojave Desert gets about maybe an average about five inches. Sonoran Desert is something like 3 to like 20 inches, depending on the year. You can see on the left a map of the Mojave Desert, which is a bit wetter and cooler, and then the Sonoran Desert to the south, which is hotter and drier. And I'll talk a little bit more about those. But most of all, I want to emphasize that deserts are not barren, they're not empty, and they're not, wasteland, they're not useless. They're actually very biodiverse. This is a map that Nature Conservancy put together. So you can see us in California over here, and these red spots are actually hot spots of biodiversity, and that's areas that have a large amount of plant and animal life. So you can count a lot of different species in a small area, and that's the essence of biodiversity. So that's really exciting for us. We have a lot of topography, mountains that provides a lot of different habitats for different animals and plants. So we are in a biodiversity hotspot in here, and also to the west in the LA Basin, which is a different province, but that's also highly biodiverse as well. So we're in a really special spot. And the next slide is going to tell you a little bit more about the deserts and why they matter. And so deserts store carbon because they're very dry. They're actually able to retain carbon. And of course, talking about global climate change, retaining carbon and keeping it out of the atmosphere is really important. At the same time, deserts are under, pressure for development because of their recreation, their open spaces, abundant sunshine, open land. So here you see a photo I took of the Coachella Valley on the upper right, Palm Springs area, Palm Desert area. You can see the vast area of golf courses in green, where essentially you would see sand dunes and shrubs prior. So a lot of people like to live out here, and that's one pressure on the environment. The other is solar. So you see on the lower right, a solar panel on a rooftop, which is a great place to put solar energy. It's also under pressure to be out on the land in the desert. So that's another thing that's happening. And so where I like to study is in the outdoors. So this is, again, telling you about the Mojave Desert. Mojave Desert, again, is not a barren land. It's cooler, upper elevation desert, lower evaporation. We have beautiful cacti, shrubs, and Joshua trees, junipers. And here's some folks looking at a field site where you have Pinion Pine. This doesn't look a lot like you'd think about when you think about the desert. And if there are any questions that are urgent, let me know. I'll leave it to my co-host or we could maybe, David, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
A lot of us can't really see your screen share. It's like a black screen.
Oh, okay. Ilima, can you see?
I am able to see. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I apologize for that.
I can stop and start again. I can stop and start the share.
Thank you.
Let me try that. See, stop. And then I will reshare the PowerPoint show. Okay. Let me know if that is improved. Co-hosts. Okay, I see a spinny wheel, so might have to hang on for just a second.
I'm able to see this one as well, but I'm curious about the other participants, if you are also able to see the slide with the juniper and the volunteers measuring. Okay, looks like Brooke said we cannot see it.
I'm on my phone and I can see it.
David, is it improved?
No, it's still black.
Okay, Frank Bradley says he can, and Annika says she can't. And Carter Yane says he's on his computer and he can see it. Tyler and Aaron can both see it. Steve, Jessica, and Valentina can see. So there are a lot of folks saying that they can see.
Okay.
So
Hmm.
maybe it has something to do with the technology that you're watching from, or
Mhm.
folks who cannot see it on their phones, maybe? And there might be a
Let's
little lag
see.
time, or,
David, if you want to go ahead and log out, we could readmit you. Maybe that will be a fix on your end.
Mhm,
Okay, let me try that. Thank you.
mhm.
Mhm.
I did forward a PDF version of this to some of the organizers, and I'm happy to have that shared afterwards if that helps for those that can't see.
This
as
is
well.
Jovita. Dr. Sweet, did you, is that on our website, Ilima? Because I know you've been sending me links. No?
yeah, that one is not on the website. We gave Lynn extra time, and we didn't want to make a slide deck a requirement. So
Okay.
it is, I will forward this to you, Jovita, and then you'll have it. I'm not sure. Let me see, is how to.
Envirothon 2 is the PDF that I sent, so that some of
Okay.
you could have access to it. Yeah, and maybe just share among you.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're having some problems. Well, I apologize for the problems. I'll continue now, but please co-host interrupt or let me know if there's further issues. So here we're looking at a slide of Mojave Desert vegetation, which is again, not a barren land. It's very biodiverse. We have oaks, pinion pines, and a variety of wildlife as well. All right. We are gonna have a little delay with advancing the slides today. I think the internet's a little slow today. Oh, okay. See, okay, there we go. So Colorado, it might actually advance 2 slides now, but essentially Colorado desert vegetation is much drier, a lot of annual plants, and it is also, you get summer rainfall. So if anyone's been to Phoenix or seen the monsoon season, that's those summer thunderstorms that come in, provide rainfall, and also make that a very biodiverse region as well, extending from Southern California out to Arizona, and down into Mexico, Baja as well. So here in this slide, you're probably still looking at is an Ocotillo, which is an amazing desert plant. It's a perennial, tall perennial plant. It actually can leaf out really quickly after rainfall. I think in several days it can produce leaves. And then after it's dry, it actually just drops those leaves again. So it does photosynthesis just when it can. Let's see, moving along here. Apologize for the slow presentation. Let's see, gonna try to keep going. Okay, so this is just another look at Colorado desert vegetation. When your slide changes, you'll see another picture of flowers in the desert. And then the slide I'm seeing now is the desert has perennials and cacti. That's really how you know you're in the desert when you can see this beautiful succulent plants, including the Joshua tree on the left and a cactus on the right. And a variety of annual wildflowers, again, is a characteristic of the desert. So it looks very barren in the summertime, normally, especially in the Mojave or the Western desert, where you don't have monsoons, and then in the springtime, just a wonderful display of desert annual plants. And can you see a big shrub with a man standing in the middle? Right now, are we advanced to that slide yet? Ilima? Yes. Okay, good.
Yes,
Great.
yes.
And so some of these plants, they're remarkably tough. The desert plants are pretty awesome. They have to do with so few resources. They are tough plants. This is the king clone creosote that you can actually see on Google Earth. It is a circle. So it essentially starts in the middle and starts cloning itself outward. And this man is about 6'5". So it's a very large circle that, again, you can see in Google Earth, and it's 11,000 years old. So some of these plants that may not look like much are actually really incredible, and they've been around for a very long time. Some of the ecosystem services, or in terms of what's the environment doing for us, those are things like flood control. The vegetation slows the water, provides absorption into the groundwater, climate control, shade, air quality, releasing oxygen, dust control, and of course, things like pollinators and pests. Pest control come out of that biodiversity that we have in the natural environment that helps with the things we do, like grow crops and so forth. And so when I was at the Huntington Garden a few years ago during my PhD, we went to the Huntington and I saw this sign up on a door. Plants are up to something. And so I'm a plant biologist. I enjoy seeing what plants are doing, even though they look like they're not doing anything. They're doing something, and we can study it. Also, they stay still, and those are a little bit easier to study than animals, which is fun. So at the same time, we have pressures of global climate change. So the human influence on the climate system is really clear. We're seeing these recent emissions of greenhouse gases that are the highest in history, and this is really having an effect on human and natural systems here. And so here is a graphic of IPCC graphic of observed climate change, and this is actually the observed change in rainfall, showing differences in rainfall in the past decade. So things are changing, and sometimes things are actually increasing in rainfall, some areas are decreasing in rainfall, but just so global change. That's why instead of global warming per se, we tend to use the word global change, because that describes what's happening a little bit better. So the IPCC, which is the international authority, has put out, other graphics to kind of explain what's going on. There are two graphs that you see on your computer. So one is A is time going on the x-axis, and temperature on the y-axis. And this is showing the change in temperature over time going from the past and then predicted changes into the future. And then on the right, sea ice extent. So changes in the past and running into the predicted changes into the future. So we have a lot of scientists working on this problem, trying to figure out, what we might see in the future, especially on our U.S. parks, our threatened national parks. So unfortunately, the Southwest has already experienced some of the sharpest declines in in rainfall in the contiguous 48 states. So that's a real pressure. Patrick Gonzalez has been working on this as a Berkeley professor, and on behalf of National Park Service, he's testified before Congress about the issue. In fact, he was explaining that, we've seen increasing levels of aridity or dryness and hotter temperatures than have been seen at least 1,300 years. And when I talked to him, I said, how can I explain to folks about climate change and how we know that we are causing this, that it is human driven? And so some of the evidence he laid out is pretty straightforward. So we are seeing carbon dioxide levels highest in 800,000 years. And that additional carbon dioxide we see in the atmosphere, if you sampled the molecules, those isotopically match the fossil fuels and not necessarily natural sources, the increased levels anyway. We know that higher CO2 levels physically cause higher temperatures. And then the analysis of all causes, things like solar cycles and all these other things that could be causing temperature rises, those can only explain about 3% of what we're seeing. The rest is due to higher CO2 levels. So we, as biologists, ecologists, we study the relationship between organisms and their environment. This is a look at some of the biologists and ecologists I've had the pleasure to work with over time, and we're on the case. We're here to try to understand how plant life and animal life is changing on the planet so that we can have the best response to that. So this is a look at some of the fun we're having out in the environment. And I hope my slides are changing somewhat as fast as I'm changing them here. So let me know if you're really not seeing the slides as I am. But I want to acknowledge that at Joshua Tree National Park, where we're working in Southern California, this is the traditional land of the Serrano, Chemehuevi, Cahuilla, and Mojave tribes traditionally, and we have the privilege to work there, which is really cool. Looking at climate in Joshua Tree, Lily has a question.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention that in the chat, we have included the PDF for all the students to download and follow along if they wanted to.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. So climate change in Joshua Tree. So we're looking at, climate in Joshua Tree, sorry. So this is looking across a big wide wash in Joshua Tree near the southern end. This is looking at a modeled temperature surface. So I do a lot of mapping. So that's what biogeography is looking at the landscape and looking at what's going on across the landscape on maps. So I do a lot of GIS. geographic information systems. This is a map of temperature. The red areas are hottest, the blue areas are coldest. This is average maximum temperature of the hottest season over the landscape. So this is a modeled surface of temperature. You can see this is actually sort of the Big Bear area, if you know where that is, on the left, that blue area, and then Joshua Tree National Park on the right, and then Palm Springs is down here in that deep red. And so this is looking at maximum temperatures from 16 to 46 C, which is 46 is about 114 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's average maximum temperature in the past. Now you look at the top, you can see 1981 to 2010. So this is kind of current maximum temperature, right? You can see an increase in areas with those hot temps. And then when you get to the final slide, you'll see this is what we predict to end of century. So these are the areas, you can see that red color spreading out on the map. So these are now the areas that are getting those really, really hot temperatures, running from, again, cool to hot. So that's the effect that we're going to see potentially locally under climate change. And just to explain, I just wanted to say we have what's called it's like a Mediterranean climate where we get all of our precipitation, as you know, most of it in the wintertime, very little in the summertime. We do get a little bit of the summer monsoon from the east. And here's a look at, I wanted to show you a little more about the vegetation in Joshua Tree National Park, just so you understand how biodiverse it is and how much we care about it, how much we enjoy working there. Beautiful cacti, they're endemic species. And so when we're looking at it, the landscape where the park, Joshua Tree, is asking us, how can we best manage this biodiversity for visitors and into the future for the plants and animals that live there? And so we do what we say is assessing climate change vulnerability. So we're looking at the vulnerability or a risk to species of climate change. And so, for instance, here's an example looking at changes in chuckwalla habitat. I don't know if anyone's had the pleasure of seeing a chuckwalla. They're a rather large lizard that lives out on the rocks in Joshua Tree and to the south near Palm Springs as well, many other places. So yeah, it's a really cool lizard. It comes out when it's really hot. So that's a fun one. So looking at, I actually modeled the changes in the range or where the species lives on a map, right? Where that bubble, that polygon is on the landscape with climate change. So with climate change, we expect things to shift along kind of like that map we looked at where the red spots are moving upward, so we're looking at the habitat in yellow on this map. That's the area that they currently occupy that we predict might become unsuitable. The area in green is what we call refugia, and I'll talk more about that. That's where they are now, that they can stay. And then areas in blue here is future suitable habitat. So that's range contraction or range change of a species. And I have a graphic that explains it a little bit more. So that's what we're trying to understand. Are things changing? Are things shifting? This is a vulnerability assessment we did for a variety of species, just to show you we can take a whole list of species and we can say who's more vulnerable and who's less vulnerable. And some things like creosote bush may be less vulnerable on this list, and things like Pinion Pine or Joshua Tree are maybe more vulnerable. So that's what we do as scientists. We use all the information we can to see what kind of risk is going on for the species. So this is just another map of Joshua Tree National Park. Here's Yucca Valley and Joshua Tree here, and 29 Palms up here. And this is the Colorado Desert. Towards the east is Arizona. More summer rain to the Arizona, more winter rain to the west towards LA. And mean annual temperature, or the average temperature, of course, increases as you go to the east and also to the south. So Mojave Desert on the north side of the park and Colorado Desert on the south side of the park. Park is actually really big. It's actually, I think it's about half the size of Rhode Island or something like that. It's really large space. So if you do go out there, take some time to drive around and see it. So in order to study this, we have to use scientific methods. So we use various ecological methods to study what's on the land now and how it's changing. So we have what we call line intercept. So we run a line through, basically a tape through the vegetation, and we say, what is essentially covering, what's the land cover, what's the vegetation cover. We do belt transect, where we count everything as a census. We count everything within a defined area. And then we call it a full demographic sweep, which is we have a big square, and we walk around with GPS units and we count all of the species within a certain area. So that can tell us something about abundance or number of species there. So those are the kind of the methodology we use. And Joshua trees, of course. So Joshua trees they are the namesake of the park. They are like they're named in the mission statement for the park as something they have to protect. And so we partner with the park in order to work on how can we protect the species and understand it? Because it would be very sad for Joshua trees not to be at Joshua Tree National Park. So why are Joshua trees vulnerable biologically? Their growth is really slow. They take about 20 to 30 years to actually grow up to a size they can flower. The reproduction is not every year. Reproduction being setting flowers, setting seeds, making seeds that germinate. They can either seed, but they have to usually be protected underneath a shrub, or they can actually stump sprout or sprout from underneath an existing tree. But they only have one pollinator, and a pollinator is an insect or something that provides essentially pollinates the plant and allows it to make seed. So on the bottom left of the slide, you can see the yucca moth, and that's one single species that provides that pollinator service to this plant for the whole species. That's pretty incredible, just one moth. So when we talk about the tree, we also have to think about the moth if we want to keep the trees as well. So there's a look at the moth on the left on the pretty Joshua tree flower. Here's a look at the whole inflorescence or flower head. And then on the right here, you can see the seeds of the species. And on the far right, you can see a new seedling sprouting up underneath an existing shrub in the park. So our job is to study, where are the healthiest Joshua tree stands now and where are the healthiest stands into the future. So we're seeing increases in temperature in the park and decreases in rainfall. So it's getting hotter and drier. And that really affects small new plants. If you've ever tried to grow like a corn or a bean, if you don't water it and you put it in the windowsill, it's gonna, fall over. So we know that little seedlings are very vulnerable. We are seeing changes in the year-round soil moisture that affects all trees. And then things like changes in if there's snow or if there's frost, when that happens and so forth, that'll affect the moth and the whole pollination cycle. So we have to think about all of those things with the conservation of the tree as a unit. And of course, reproduction is key to sustainable populations. You have to have baby trees to have big trees. And if we aren't seeing baby trees, now we're not going to have big trees into the future. They live about several hundred years. But, in several hundred years, those trees will age out and we need seedlings to replace them. I just wanted to put this in for context. I have a map of the Western Joshua tree and the Eastern Joshua tree, so you understand there actually are two species of the tree. If you've ever been to Las Vegas, you've seen a different form of the tree. And there's a picture on the right showing you how widely that branch is, and it's much more shrubby. And then on the left, you see the Western Joshua tree that we have at Joshua Tree National Park that looks more tree-like. Both are very vulnerable biologically, but the Western tree is the one that's being considered for listing under the state of California threatened species status. So if you're still with me, so we have, I hope you're seeing a slide showing how we do modeling or how we model potential changes in habitat for trees. So what we do is we get lots of point data. Cool. We get lots of point data. So essentially, where are the trees? Somebody takes a point on a GPS unit. There's an app called iNaturalist. We source a variety of point data for the species. Where is it occurring? You can see a map of that on the bottom. And then we take environmental layers that describe temperature and precipitation. And we take current layers and we take predicted future climate layers, mash them together in a computer. And what we get is a projected habitat of the species into the future. So the computer says, what are the tolerances of the species now? And if we look at the future, where are those tolerances met in the future? So they might be happy in one place and then in the future in a different place. So this is a graphic that shows you that. So where can species persist into the landscape with climate change? So we have areas that might be lost for habitat. They die out. They're not what we call recruiting. We have gain, and we have what we call refugia. So refugia is something in the middle. It's like a refuge for the species. So imagine, okay, So imagine you have a species that's on the landscape, and this is a big circle around where it lives in the landscape, right? And you got a low elevation up to a middle elevation, and that's where it occurs now. Well, let's say I do my modeling in the computer and it spits out a range that shows something like the area that I hope you're seeing in yellow to the left. So in the future, the species conditions might be met on the left. Where is the area where the species already is, where it can persist and thrive, and we know it can? That would be the area in the middle in orange. And so that's an area that the conditions are met for the species and they already exist. Things that can't move, like, so if I'm talking about a coyote, I would think, oh, coyotes can actually just run up the hill, they can move very easily. Joshua trees cannot move very easily. First of all, they're trees, they don't have legs, they can't walk. Also, it takes them a long time to disperse. They don't have a long distance disperser. They don't have tiny seeds that blow in the wind, so they can't move really. And so we don't expect them to move very fast or keep up with climate change. So the areas like that area in orange is where we expect them to stay into the future. So what we did is we said, okay, can we take where the species is now, model that, and then can we say, where would this tree occur in the future if we really do something about climate change, highly mitigated, if we do moderate mitigation, or if we just do no mitigation, we just keep emitting carbon, everything just goes as it is now, there's no changes in policy. So what you see is a graph showing temperature from 1960 up to 2100. The past is on the left in gray, and then the predicted future temperatures are on the right from 2010 up to 2100. And so what you see is temperatures rising, average maximum temperature this is for California, in the inland deserts, pretty, lower for that blue line. That's highly mitigated. We do something, we keep the temperature from rising, and then business as usual. So that's the highest temperature increases. So that those on the graphics I'm about to show you will be in red. So this is going to show you what will happen to Joshua trees if we highly mitigate climate change or if we do nothing for climate change. And this is, this is a look at what could happen. Of course, we don't know, but this is a look at what could happen with climate change. The first graphic is showing just where the species occurs in gray in Joshua Tree National Park. So this is the gray blob showing where the species occurs, Joshua trees in the park. The second graphic is our 2099 highly mitigated scenario. So this is like, we take action on climate change, we get the electric vehicles, we do something about climate change. This is, we still might see a reduction in where Joshua trees might occur, see that in gray, but it'll be, it's actually down to about 20% of the range. So that's probably what we're facing anyway. This is probably what's going to happen. We don't know for sure because it's a model. Next, I'm going to show you moderately mitigated. So this is about 14% of the range. So this is, we do a little bit less on climate change. And then the last slide I'm going to show you is what would happen if we just did nothing about climate change for Joshua trees and other species and ourselves, of course. This is look at end of century in that scenario. So that's showing unmitigated. We really lose basically all the Joshua trees in Joshua Tree National Park. Now they won't just go poof, they won't just disappear. We have very tough desert plants out there. They'll probably, persist on the landscape, but there's no, we wouldn't predict any new seedlings, no new recruitment, and we would see the adults die off. So that's what we think could happen at the end of century if we do nothing. So that's a stark picture. We don't want that to happen. Of course, like I said, Joshua trees do occur to the north, but the picture looks pretty similar to the north in terms of the trees only surviving at the highest elevations. So we want, models are great, but models can be wrong. So we want to see, is this happening? Does this make any sense? Like, are we seeing the opposite? Maybe we're seeing the opposite on the ground. We don't know. And so we're going to look at validating it or trying to see if it's true at all, looking at the climate change that's already happened. So we got teams of citizen scientists, volunteers from universities and schools. And essentially what we did is, you can see on the lower left, a square in the landscape, and there's green bubbles showing you every single Joshua tree we counted in that square on the ground. And the size of the bubble has to do with the size of the tree. So I mapped size class and the position of each Joshua tree. So we counted all the Joshua trees, over 4,000 Joshua trees, we counted within the park to say, okay, well, where are the young trees? Where are they recruiting, as we say? Where will there be another generation of Joshua trees, even now, safely entering, hopefully, the future with us? So this is a map showing Joshua tree, excuse me, plots that we sampled, those 4,000 trees. So what you're seeing is in gold, there's X's showing the plots that really are not recruiting as well. They don't have as many young trees. And then plots that have lots of good, baby Joshua trees, lots of recruitment happening in green. And so we're already seeing those green plots where we're getting healthy stands. Those are already aligning where we predict climate change will have the trees into the future, at least under the 4.5 or the highly mitigated scenario. So what we're saying is we have a prediction that says this is where Joshua trees could occur in the future. And we already know climate change is happening. And this is what we're already seeing. We're seeing better recruitment of seedlings in those areas as well. Hope that makes sense. Happy to answer questions, especially at the end as we have them to clarify. And I wanted to point out another reason we're doing this and trying to make a map. Where are the stands that are surviving to end of century? Where are those going to be? Because these are really vulnerable to fire, unfortunately. Joshua trees are not adapted to fire. This is a graphic from a paper we just had come out looking at energy development and endangered species in the Mojave. So what I just want you to pay attention to is areas in green, this sort of green bubble here, that's the predicted climate refugia. And then areas in red are areas where fires have happened. So you can see and only about 10% survive fire. So we're already seeing threats to these really productive stands. On the lower right, you can see a picture I took at SEMA Dome. This is an area with the eastern tree that burned up. And we're studying actually what's happening there. But the trees you're seeing here are not going to survive because they got burned. So it's pretty stark, but we want to make sure this does not happen to our healthy stands of Joshua trees. This is, again, SEMA Dome. This is actually the ghost outline of a tree on the ground in ash. So that's, go ahead, Ilima.
Lynn, is it true? I was reading a little bit about that fire and it sounded like we lost 1.3 million Joshua trees from that fire.
Yeah,
like a really significant impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, the park made that estimate based on the density of their stands. Yeah, the Mojave Preserve holds this really incredible biodiverse area called SEMA Dome, and it had a variety of shrub species and bighorn sheep and desert tortoises, lots of species there. And because of a variety of factors, including probably climate change, and a fire that was caused by it's actually caused by lightning. But the stands burned up. We're still putting together the pieces of the puzzle as to why that natural fire happened and why it was so destructive. But it is something we have to be aware of because that was a very thick stand of Joshua trees. So losing that, isn't good. And that also emitted carbon as well at the same time. So yeah, so we're working with Mojave Preserve actually to understand a little bit better about what's happening there. So again, Mojave Desert ecosystems are not well adapted to fire. Only about 10% of Joshua trees survive wildfire. These areas that we've modeled refugia, or that safe spot, might be used to plan where you might protect stands of Joshua trees with limited resources. And things like collections of seeds are really valuable for habitat restoration. So Mojave Preserve is actually working on replanting Joshua trees into this area because we know it's really special and it's an area that potentially trees could survive climate change. So that's why it's a complicated topic that we're trying to tackle, and we're trying to provide parks the best information. So this is a look at California, like a topography of California. You can see the LA Basin to the west here, and you can see the Coachella Valley to the right, Joshua Tree National Park here. And this is just to give you an idea. So this is where Joshua trees occur now in this sort of blob and in tan. And this is a look at the current healthy stands at end of century for Joshua trees in green. And just to give you an idea of how Joshua trees might survive maybe a little bit more of an optimistic picture here. So first of all, topography, using those upper elevation stands that we talked about that might survive into the future. That's good for the species. And then human actions. Can we prevent those wildfires? Can we take action on climate change? Can we reduce air pollution? Because the topic I didn't bring up, but that feeds into this issue is air pollution actually feeds weeds, which feed fire. So that's another aspect of this that we're concerned about. So essentially the air pollution fertilizes these unnatural grasses that then promote fire by acting like tinder. So Joshua trees, again, might be able to move up in elevation short distances as opposed to northward. We know going to the north, it normally gets cooler, but you have to move about, I believe it's about 1 kilometer north to be about the same temperature change as, tens of meters up in elevation. So it's actually much more efficient for trees to exist in upper elevation than to try to migrate, which I said, Joshua trees don't migrate to the north. Things like, again, roadrunners, coyotes, things like that can migrate. Joshua trees, not so much. So we're hoping that's how they can persist. Another thought is that, what can you do? So you can think about, we're seeing we're seeing climate change happen. Farmers are seeing Joshua tree climate change happen. We're all watching this happen, and there's recorded records of what's happening. And it's time to work together on climate change. So think about, depoliticizing it. It's not a political issue. We're just studying what's going on, and we're concerned about it. Think about climate resilience in your own community. So you might live in a city, and you might think about, where are the shade trees at? Where are, what's your water supply like? It's a good time to start thinking about the resources you and your community need to be resilient with climate change as well. Supporting renewable, responsible renewable energy. Things like, where are we going to put the solar panels that, we need to put out on the landscape somewhere in order to meet our clean energy requirements in California. So where are those going to go? And that's where you get into the politics of how do we do this? How do we solve this problem? So renewable energy, a good place to put it is on, I don't know, can we do it on parking lots? Maybe all of you will develop some kind of new technology that we can use to put it in some less destructive place than out in the desert. So this is why it's so important for you all to learn about this, so you can help us dream up solutions. Support seed banking efforts. So things like, botanical gardens and societies, land trusts, if you can, go out and see what they're doing, support their efforts. Again, issues of environmental justice. So it ties into climate resilience, where especially communities that have less resources are going to be less able to respond to climate change. Things like thinking about a grandmother in the East Valley, her electricity bill going up as it gets hotter. Is she able to pay that bill as well as somebody who's very wealthy? So that's where you get into environmental justice, folks that aren't able to have the benefits of wealth and power with climate change. So it's the disproportionate effect on underserved communities that don't have the resources. And that's not fair. As well, supporting diversity, equity, inclusion in science. As I said, we need all the folks at the table. We need all of those perspectives, because solving these issues will be complicated and will require a variety of perspectives. And then supporting access to parks and open spaces. And I hope you are encouraged to get out and look at your own natural spaces and parks. And then just to think about, you all are interested in the environment anyway, so I don't have to say this, but thinking about yourself and what are you noticing? What are your concerns? Having a confidence in your ability to notice and understand patterns you're seeing. Maybe you're seeing your apple tree or apricot tree fruit earlier, noticing some things around you, because those are legitimate observations about the natural world too. Understanding where to find further information, from your teachers, from other people, instilling confidence in you as natural observers. Here's my son at 5 on the right, trying to look for bighorn sheep last weekend at Anza-Borrego. And, instilling confidence in you to understand and navigate scientific spaces. So the more you know and the more you're exposed to this stuff, the more it'll become second nature. And also thinking about other perspectives and your friends who might be from different backgrounds, thinking about their ways and traditional ways of viewing the landscape as well. So all of this ties into how we'll deal with the climate change. So in conclusion, so forecasting climate-related shifts is important for conservation. We are testing predictions with field data because, again, models could be wrong. After our Joshua Tree study came out, we had a lot of press, you can see on the right, about the issue, which was really exciting to talk to a lot of people about Joshua trees and other species. The remaining suitable habitat, might be reduced under a business as usual scenario. And all in all, climate change will have significant impacts on our personal lives and the places we love. So hopefully that will motivate people to do something about climate change, because it will affect our personal places we recreate and how we live. So with that, that's what I have for you today. I'm happy to answer questions from the chat, and I'll defer to my co-host. So thank you so much for listening and spending your Saturday as well with me.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was a lot of information in a short amount of time. And I know that folks are probably trying to catch up with all of the bits and the nuggets that were presented to us just now. I do see that there is one question in the chat from Mrs. Hagan, and I can take you off mute, or I could just read the question. If you'd like me to take you off mute, it could be a bit of a discussion. I've heard this topic come up before, and I think it's a really interesting one. I'll read the question, and then if you'd like to respond, we'll take you off mute, Mrs. Hagan. Her question is, can you explain further to the students about why solar panels in the desert is a concern? Oh, and Lynn, you're on mute right now. Okay, I just took you off. Go ahead.
Okay, got it. So the desert has abundant sunshine, there is a low population density. There's a lot of open land. A lot of it is public land, your land, everybody's land. Bureau of Land Management manages some of it. So Bureau of Land Management is also named BLM, FYI. So that's the acronym for your public lands. And those lands are, those are co-managed for the needs of people. So there's things like oil and gas leases and all sorts of things that we do on public lands. And one of the pressures is to develop it for energy. It's an open space that is cheap and easy to put solar on, right? Because there's not as much, it's not like a tropical rainforest, we're not, there isn't a large biomass to remove. However, there is a diversity of plants, there is biocrust, there is carbon stored. There's all these things that you can't necessarily see. So when you think about where to put solar, you see, let's say you see a wealthy community in Palm Springs. Well, you can't cover that with a solar panel. But you see a desert environment that looks like, okay, nobody lives there. It's way out there. Who cares? But we care. So when we think about solar in the desert, we're concerned about disturbing the land, releasing carbon, reducing the biodiversity that's there, of course, and we're concerned about if you have a big solar farm that might impact like bighorn sheep movement. So animals like to move and migrate back and forth. And so if you have a big solar farm, they can't do that. So it's a concern, and it's something we have to solve as a society, how we're going to do that. Some people say we cannot meet the energy demand just on rooftop. And actually, a lot of people say that. So we're going to have to do something. We don't know. Maybe it's improving the solar cells. We don't know. So sorry, that's the answer. So I'm not a renewable energy expert, by the way. I hope that answered your question. There's a hand up also.
Yes, Carter, I'm going to take you off mute if you'd like to ask your question.
So I actually had two separate questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the first one, you mentioned that the Western Joshua Tree was considered for listing under the ESA. How come not the Eastern? Is it just like a larger range for the Eastern?
This will take a second. So when the Joshua Tree was, and the good question, was submitted for listing to the ESA, the Endangered Species Act at the national level, that was actually considered to be one species at the time. So technically, at the time, they were trying to list both species, but they we all thought they were one. So since that time, they have divided them into 2 species, and that proposal was rejected. So that, as I understand it, was rejected as a proposal, so it's not going to be listed at the federal level. However, there's some things happening in the courts, and people are being, there's some things happening in the courts regarding that issue. So for California, there was a motion to petition to just list the Western Joshua Tree, because we have the Western Joshua Tree in California primarily. And so that's the issue that's currently being debated by the California Fish and Game Commission. So they are looking at threatened species status just for the Western tree. I don't know about why they didn't try the Eastern tree, except that it's primarily in Arizona, Nevada, Utah, so to the east. Good question.
And then could I ask another question?
Yeah.
So on the slide about Joshua tree reproduction, I noticed
Mhm.
that there was a bullet point about the flat land inhibits their spread. Would you mind elaborating on why that is?
Okay, yes, this is, yeah. So essentially, if you look at the okay, you go north, right? And the temperature gets colder and colder, but you could also go uphill. Like if you've ever been on ski vacation, you go uphill up to a higher altitude. The temperature, it's called the lapse rate, is much faster going uphill than it is going northward. And so because Joshua trees occur on this flat land, mostly, they can't, they would have to go really far to meet the same temperature niche into the future if they were going to try to quote unquote move, or if they were going to migrate over time, their seedlings. So it's just much farther distance that they would have to go to meet their climate requirements. So people have thought about moving seeds, but if you move the seed, you might have to move the moth, and you might have to move some soil biota as well. So it's complicated, but there is thought about assisted migration or assisted translocation to move the tree. That's true.
Oh, so that's more about range shift rather than like actual physical reproductive ability.
Yes,
Okay,
it's about range shift and the dispersal rate. Yeah. Thank you. Good questions.
I see that Mrs. Hagan responded to your question and said she totally agrees with what you had to say about solar in the desert. And we have another question now from Shauna Ashley, who would like to know if a possible solution would be to expand the park to adapt to this gain of range that you're noticing.
Yeah. So when I talked about, so the science of climate change, again, not political, the solutions to climate change, political, so what do we do about it? When we look at the range of the Joshua tree, much of the trees actually exist on conserved land or public land. A lot of it's, again, Park Service on the southern edge, but there's conserved land to the north, but that's that BLM, et cetera. To move national park boundaries would take an act of Congress, so we're probably not going to see them do that. It's very difficult politically, but we have seen national monuments be dedicated that protect the land from certain pressures and disturbance. So very difficult, but some other kind of mechanism that's complicated politically, but maybe a landscape level plan for all the lands could happen. We don't know.
Okay. And then Steve Engelman is asking, do we have any examples of solar projects that made adjustments to accommodate for desert species? And what might those accommodations have been?
I don't think I can answer that question. I do not know. There is, let's just say there was a desert renewable energy program that was put together years ago, DRECP, that was designed to try to look at biodiversity and all of these factors. I am not a DRECP expert, though. Some of you at NRCS might probably know more about it than I do. So people are trying to. The other thing I will say is at the state level, there is a new Western Joshua Tree Conservation Act that's been proposed. It's a trailer bill that would actually put together some planning to site solar where it would not impact trees. So that's very new. That just came out last week. I was watching the commission hearing and that came out. So that's exciting. But yeah, I can't speak to individual solar projects.
Usually when they're developing something like that, if it's going on government lands or using government resources, they do the environmental evaluation process to kind of factor in those things. And certainly there, at least from my perspective in NRCS and helping private landowners from a federal seat, if we were going to have an impact on something that were ecologically sensitive, we would have to avoid impacts or mitigate those impacts somehow. But every project's different. And so those that maybe are on private land with private funding might have different requirements or a different planning framework to use. So.
Good questions.
Does anyone else have any questions?
This is Jovita. I have a quick question. I don't know if it's so quick because I know Dr. Sweet, you need to get rolling with your Saturday, but what are the secondary impacts to the ecosystem with Joshua trees in jeopardy? I'm thinking about those wildlife creatures who rely on it for shade and food, and raptors like owls and hawks that use the Joshua tree to perch and hunt. Have you seen that there is beginning to have an impact on those wildlife species?
Yeah, so as I said, these changes are underway, but they're slow, and we're expecting them to happen by end of century. And we've seen that hint of differences in seedling recruitment. So we've seen hints of differences. We haven't been able to detect changes in other communities that are related yet, because that's so complex. It's hard enough to just look at the changes in the tree. But it's an important point. There are some species. There's a concept in ecology called keystone species concept. The tree has been casually referred to as a keystone species, but there's some debate. But it is an important structural component of an ecosystem in the Mojave. So when we look at it, as you say, there are birds, there are a variety of wildlife that rely on this tree. You can see, if you look at the picture here, it's the only really big, tall, entity that's there that's providing shade, a place to perch, all of those things. So if you eliminate those, you really do eliminate like some structure of the landscape, right? So habitat structure. So absolutely, we might start to see those declines. I will say in the initial study that I described, the one in which we counted the trees, there was actually surveys for birds and lizards and all of the other wildlife. However, we lack the funding to put that all together yet. So if we got more funding in time, we could put that together to see our areas that have more trees, do they have more wildlife? Less trees, less wildlife. We'll see. But it's very hard. But good question.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
Sure. Thank you.
I have a question, Lynn, and it has to do with wildfire becoming more common in the desert now. I understand that some of the driver for that is the nitrogen deposition that you mentioned, and invasive grasses maybe we don't normally have grasses in the desert, I believe. And so now with nitrogen deposition and invasive species movements, we see more of that like carpeting cover that can carry the fire.
Yeah.
And grasses just seem like such a hard thing to tackle. Do you have have you seen strategies that work, or what are some of your thoughts about how we can address invasive species as to how they impact Joshua trees?
Yeah, that is so hard. So Ilima's talking about these non-native species, so species that were not in California, thousands of years ago, did not adapt along with our native species. These are grasses that came in along with usually like grazing. Even during the missionary period, they were bringing in some weeds from Mediterranean. So we got these new weeds, new-ish weeds in the landscape, and they're spreading. And they often are they're able to take advantage of more air pollution or other factors to grow really fast. And the problem with that is that connects tree to tree, provides that fuel layer between them, connects the trees, and then they can, flames can move between them. As to how to mitigate it, it's so hard. So this picture here, this is a landscape that has, I think I took this in the winter time, so it was actually less tree or less grass was up. But it's so widespread. The things that we can do are very difficult to do at a landscape scale to get rid of the the grasses. But what we can do is think about what areas do we want to protect, and maybe we could protect around them. So thinking about where are we getting fires? We're getting them maybe next to roads, maybe next to campgrounds, where people are. We're igniting fires. Most of the fire ignitions are human related. So can we prevent those? And that's probably the way we have to approach it. Maybe do some targeted invasive grass control where we can. Otherwise, just try to sort of surround those stands, protect them, and keep them safe from wildfire. As for what happened at SEMA Dome, again, that's really complicated. That was a natural ignition of lightning. So that's a little bit more difficult to say because it was mostly native vegetation that was burning. So that's just an interesting puzzle.
Thank you.
Good question. And I will say we are actually working with the park currently to create a fire and refugia protection plan. So we are funded to do that work over the next year or so. So that's exciting. Funny you asked. It's in progress.
Yeah. Well, okay, this is last call for questions. If anything comes up, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand. And if we don't see anything else, then we will conclude today's webinar and say thank you so much, Dr. Sweet, for your time and your expertise today. It was fascinating and I loved the photos. They were great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. And like I said, the next generation of environmental problem solvers here. So thank you.
California Envirothon thanks you so very much, Dr. Sweet, for taking your time
No
today.
problem. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Everybody have a good day.
Thank
I'll hang around a sec to say bye. Thank you.